before that over the last couple of years, I've noticed some changes that have been happening in my own body. That slow realization that there is a relationship between the calories I consume and the impact on my weight. Who knew? And I tell you what, I say this with some trepidation with my son in the pews this morning. We like to go to amusement parks. I do still like roller coasters. I love bumper cars, even though I know they're not very good for you. And I used to love pirate ships. I loved that back and forth, that sense of weightlessness as you hit the apex, that sense that your stomach was kind of disappearing. The joy of that sense of weightlessness in the stomach, though, has been replaced on a pirate ship by a different kind of sensation. I used to notice when I was my son's age that pirate ships tend to be populated by people in that kind of general demographic and not by other people, older demographics. So when I get off the pirate ship now, the primary sensation is, ugh. Your new moons, your appointed festivals, my soul hates. God says through the voice of the prophet. They've become a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make prayers, I will not listen. Idioms can be hard to appreciate in translation, but there's some thinking that that line there, my soul hates, is idiomatic. That what the prophet is trying to say is that the people's prayers, the people's festivals, the people's worship, well, that is God's very own pirate ship. Ugh. God is sick to God's own stomach. God is green in the face. You get the idea. Excessive religiosity, especially among those who are powerful, has created disconnect between what happens in worship and what happens everywhere else. This is a concern that you and I know well because all people know this concern very well. We have a nose for what we perceive to be hypocrisy, most especially hypocrisy that we see in others. Quick to chastise that behavior that we once exhibited and now have sworn off ourselves, or more to the point in Isaiah, making public pronouncements about how one should behave only to contradict such a pronouncement in private somewhere else. Religious institutions are ripe for this, of course, but any scorn directed at religious institutions, at churches, could easily be lobbed somewhere else, too. We all know this. The doctor who tells her patient to take care of himself before ducking out for a cigarette. The teacher who tells her students to solve problems with words, but then gets on the parkway after work and does anything but. The judge who speeds away from court. We find hypocrisy everywhere if we have an eye for it. Most of us have a pretty keen eagle's eye for hypocrisy. During my studies at Drew, I took a class called Minister in the Mirror as a way of holding up different representations of clergy in the media, news shows and books, movies, TV series, pushing the minister to consider what the culture was saying to the minister about the clergy and the churches which they serve. Of course, most of the depictions are incredibly negative. Many of the depictions show religious people who are hungry for something other than God, hungry for money or power or fame, affairs, drugs, you name it. But what came out of that course was really very straightforward. The people are totally against institutionalized religion unless that religious movement is dedicated to serving other people. Tax the churches, they'll say. But folks are much more likely to become ambivalent about taxing all the churches if they think that there's an alignment between the values of the church and the practices of that church. And to be sure, there is actually broad consensus in our society about what churches ought to be doing, helping the less fortunate, helping people who gather there to become better, more moral people, providing sanctuary and safe space for people looking for community, all of it revolving around an ethics of love, an embrace of a particular set of virtues, which people may argue about from time to time, but is generally contained within the greatest commandment that Jesus describes, loving God and loving neighbor. When churches do this, when church people do this, when clergy and church members do this, when they embrace the greatest commandment, accusations of hypocrisy tend to fade. Non-churchgoers were inspired by Mother Teresa, are inspired by William Barber, or Sister Norma of McAllen, Texas, will gladly take the day off for Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. So I came to this Sunday ready to talk about hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of religious language set against the lack of action or immoral action that seems to accompany such religious language in our society. On the one hand, to talk about thoughts and prayers, and to raise my voice once again about all the thoughts and prayers in this country, and how this reading reminds me of that false piety that is so readily on display in our country. And on the other hand, I felt torn approaching this Sunday with that kind of message, because it's basically the same message that I gave last Sunday. And it's broadly similar to the message I gave on the Sunday before that. That is, that the moral leadership is simply not good enough in our country, that if in the wake of shootings, and racially motivated shootings at that, all we have are prayers, then you can leave me out of it. And if in light of the humanitarian crisis at our southern border that reaches all the way down through the Americas to Venezuela, all we have are prayers, then you can leave me out of that too. And indeed, the prophet's words seem to reinforce this idea that what good is prayer or worship if people are hungry, if those who worship are hypocritical, if one would make an offering one moment and be vulgar the next? What is good is polite prayer if our actions are profane? God doesn't need us to worship in order to be God. The God depicted by Isaiah is passionate and demonstrative, not distant or reserved. God is really into what's going on. God really cares, according to the prophet. And because God really cares, God looks at worship that has no social justice, no care for the oppressed and the weak. And God feels like God just got off the pirate ship, green in the face, roughly mirroring how a lot of us feel at the use of prayer language as an obstacle to protecting the innocent and upsetting an immoral status quo. And at the same time, I really didn't want to get into the news of the day today, the news of the week this one Sunday. Just take a day off from all of this. I worry about badgering you. There's one thing that keeps me up at night most of the time. I worry about badgering you with what's going on and going on and on and on about the intersections of faith and the world. I worry that in here feels just like out there. I've got a vacation coming up soon, and really I think we should take a week off from all of this horrible stuff. White supremacy and immigration and gun violence, the tiresome empty rhetoric, the pathetic lack of morals and integrity. I just want some space. I deleted Twitter off my phone yesterday, not permanently, but just for a break. And man, felt so good. Felt so good. And so this is the tension. This is the tension that exists in the practice that we call worship in the church. Balancing the need for restoration and charity and social action without leaving people with a sense of just being overwhelmed all the time, completely dispirited, disconnected, and anxiety-ridden. Having space for confronting evil while also cherishing the goodness of God, the goodness of grace, the hope that springs eternal from faith in the divine Creator, and indeed, the goodness of humanity as it is expressed here and around the world, and cherishing that sometimes. So it will at times strike some of us, motivated by the call to action, as hypocritical that here we have in our church's statement of purpose the work to recognize and relieve systemic oppression, while we seem to tend to ourselves from time to time. And for others, they will see the part of our statement of purpose says that we should grow in our relationship with God. And how can we possibly grow in our relationship with God if we spend so much time talking about the rest of the world? How can we expect our spiritual selves to blossom if we just talk about everybody else? You become what you tend to, as the old saying goes. But that tension is within all of us. The need to act and the need for space. The need for reflection and the need to have an opportunity to serve the world, to tend to its wounds, to do the next right thing. And you can't really do one without the other, of course. This is what hypocrisy actually is, the wearing of a mask to cover up what actually lies beneath. Hypocrisy is to pray as if there is no world that needs mending, and hypocrisy is to believe that there is only a world that requires me and only me to fix it. Andrea Rudnick, one of the Team Brownsville leaders down in Texas, she was describing this week the cruelties of the Remain in Mexico policies, known as MPP, Migrant Protection Protocols, which means that when a migrant comes to a border, they wait for weeks and often many, many months before they can cross the bridge and have a credible fear interview. After they receive the interview, now they are being returned to Mexico, where they have to wait for a hearing with an immigration judge, which can take many months to arrange. And you can imagine how heartbreaking it is for someone who has waited at a port of entry for 7 months to have an interview, to have that interview, and to pass that interview only to be returned back to Mexico to wait for many more months. The situation is fast becoming beyond farcical. And I guess, if you want, you can call it winning. After expending every resource, after being homeless for months, some folks from the Northern Triangle are deciding that the best option for them now is to go back to the gangs at home. No money, no place to call home, no bed, just the clothes on your back. They're giving up to go back to the gangs because that's now the better alternative. Team Brownsville said goodbye to a family from Guatemala, a young couple with a young child this week. Put a little bit of money in their backpack, wished them well, prayed for them, and they decided they were going home. And so we're winning, I guess, breaking the spirits of others. And Team Brownsville folks, they're watching this, and they feel so drained by the relentless burdens. And Andrea wrote this week after seeing this family from Guatemala off. She said, "We, the volunteers, are struggling physically, mentally, and emotionally to keep going. The human toll slaps you in the face with every crossing, with every tale of hardship and peril. The human needs are endless. No matter how much we carry or how many individual requests we fill, there's no sense of finality. Tomorrow there'll be more new people in peril with the same human needs that we all have. To my Honduran, Nicaraguan, Salvadoran, Guatemalan, Panamanian, Cuban, Venezuelan, Cameroonian, Peruvian brothers and sisters, I see you, we see you. We see your pain, your sacrifice, and we want you to know that we stand by you. We will be there for the long haul, and good people will stand with us as we support you in your time of need." You can hear the tiredness, the fatigue in that statement, wondering about when it will all ever end. And also in there is a very profound sense of gratitude for others. My Honduran brothers and sisters, the good people who will stand with us, that desire to lean into another's pain. We all need to rest, even Andrea. The migrants, they need to rest. We all need to rest. There's always the question of why we're resting. Is it because relaxing, recuperating, taking time out is the point of our lives? Or are we recuperating in order to try and tackle the problems of the world once again? And that's the hypocrisy of my generation, the hypocrisy of our moment. The pictures we take often seem to be the point. The endless images of us relaxing and enjoying ourselves and savoring the greatest foods seem to often be the point of existing, when in fact, worship is the point. Worship is the point because it's a way, and perhaps the best way, in gratitude for all that I have, worshiping. Getting outside of my own space and my own head. In need of rest and reflection, we worship. In need of community and the strength of others, we worship. In need of mending wounds, we worship. In need of exploring the point of our lives apart from the vigors of the real world, we worship. In order to mend that dissection that lives within me between recuperating and being reinvigorated enough to lean into another's concerns and the problems of the world, the great suffering of our time, the enormous systemic challenges of our era, in order to tend to these, we worship. We worship to take off the masks. We worship to confront life as it is, not as we simply wish that it would be. We wish because we know that when we do remove those masks as we worship, it's going to be okay because we're not alone. We worship because we want to live into that tension between the way the world is and the way that we want it to be. We want to live into that, not just simply wish for it. We worship because we crave an alignment between the highest values we know and the values we wish to offer ourselves, our families, and the world. We worship because it is the path to fulfillment. May you worship. May you worship in all that you do. May you worship making space for your needs so that you can lean into those of another this week, no matter where you find yourself, no matter what you are doing, no matter whom you are encountering. May you worship. May you give thanks for all of the many blessings God has given you. And may you give thanks for the opportunity to lean into the problems of the world, to be blessed and to be a blessing. May you worship. Go in peace, my friends. Amen.